Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Ask About Wealth podcast. As regular listeners will know, we kind of split our guests between entrepreneurs and people in the financial business. Last week we interviewed Kevin from Quintus, and we talked about particular investment products and services that he brings as a bespoke fund manager to the market. This week I'm delighted to welcome a gentleman I've been talking to for quite a while before we started recording, Andrew McAllister, who I would best describe as a serial entrepreneur. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, and thanks for coming. Andrew, tell us about you were telling me there before we started recording, you have a number of businesses, hence the use of serial entrepreneur. Tell us about your businesses and tell us about how they came to be.
Well, it's a necessity, really, the first one. It's funny you use the word entrepreneur, and it's something that I would not really define myself as if you were to ask me. But like that, when I'm reflecting on things, I can see why you might use that term. How did I come to be with the first business? I suppose I was in a position where I needed money and I had to set something up, and I was able to find a niche that I could get into. And I was also spent a long time in third level education, and this business was able to somewhat support me and be flexible to my hours at the time.
And you're an architect by profession, isn't that correct?
Yeah, well, I'm an architecture technologist and an architect.
Okay.
I did the two of them back to back. So,
what does the second one mean? I know what an architect is.
So the architecture, the technologist was my route of getting into architecture. So I didn't really have the academia in secondary school to get me straight into architecture, but the 3-year architecture technology was like a route way into that.
Okay. And did you work as an architect then for a period of time in a kind of standard day job, as it were?
Yeah, my father is an architect, and I worked with him really all throughout my architectural education. So for the guts of 10 years, even when I was studying, I'd be still working with him part-time and full-time during summers. And I was probably teaching him more about architecture, and he was teaching me more about business in the end. But it was funny. But when I graduated, I was working part-time with him and the other part-time on my mapping business up until March 2020.
So you say you saw a niche in the mapping business. Tell us about that. What does that business do, and how did a young trainee architect find this niche?
Yeah, it was a brainstorming session with my father at the time. I can't fully remember because it's so long ago now, but he was looking to get into certain niches, and I was building the websites for him and helping him with that. And ultimately, he came to take one of the business, and I took the other one in the end. So I don't actually fully know the answer to that question because I can't remember. But I do remember that the mapping one was the one that suited me more, and the other one was the one that suited him more. So we were happy to kind of take one each, even though we built them both at the same time. So
you start this entrepreneurial. I mean, I think I told you before we started recording, I lecture in a private business college in Dublin. And the definition of an entrepreneur is someone who asks or who adds value to scarce resources. And I think by that definition, from what you've told me about your businesses, you are definitely an entrepreneur. So you start your entrepreneurial life with your mapping business, and then you've developed on, haven't you? You have other businesses now, and the one that caught our attention and one that led us to ask you to come in here was this Sea Sauna business.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's an exciting business for sure. It's one of a side business that kind of turned into a side monster in many ways. But no, it was an idea that I had during COVID of wanting to reconnect with nature more so than anything else. And I found myself in a position where I was kind of lost in the architectural practice world because I knew it wasn't where I wanted to be to where I wanted to get to be. And I had to kind of let go of the practice and take a step back, really, because when you're standing so close that you can't see the big picture. And when I took a step back, it created a space for me to do something new. And the sauna and the place where it is in Portrane is very special. And I knew that it was something that I wanted to bring there. It was also a time where I think the Irish just discovered the outdoors maybe during COVID. I remember sitting on the beach on Christmas Eve in 2020 or 2021, and there wasn't a space to sit. Like, there was hundreds of people on the beach, and it was in the depths of winter. And that really fueled the idea of the sauna, because I could see that, we're not just going to sit inside for the rest of the winter. We're getting out, we're doing stuff. And yeah, I took a risk in pumping all my savings into this new idea. But ultimately I made peace with what would the worst outcome might have been, which would be I'd have to sell it and might lose some money on the way. But I could also see the potential for what it could be. And at the time when I started, nobody really was believing in what I was doing, and everyone thought I was crazy. And all the walkers be walking by and they'd be like, "Oh, sure, who'd want to go in there?" And then fast forward 6 months and we're busy every weekend, and then everyone's like, "Oh, sure, that was a great idea. Yeah, I knew that was going to be a success."
Hindsight is a virtue.
Yeah.
But you touched on something there which I think is important for people to realise, that starting your entrepreneurial journey, as it were, you have to be willing to give something up. What did you give up to take that first step, as it were, into Sea Sauna?
I gave up a lot of comfort, definitely. And we just talked about it beforehand, was stepping out of your comfort zone. And for me, I was leaving architectural practice, which is very comfortable. I could stay there for my life if I wished, to then having to take a leap of faith to stand outside in the rain and drag a sauna behind a car and deal with all that until we got established as such. And that was the first real sacrifice, and I'd put in all my savings into this. So there was no room for a nice holiday or a break for the first year or two. And any of the money that I was making, I was just pumping it back in, because I was seeing the growth and more people coming to enjoy it. And ultimately where we started and where we are today are worlds apart. The first was like a trailer sauna in a field, and when it would rain I'd be worried in the muck. While now we have like a proper destination with showers and plunge pools, and it feels like somewhere. And I'm still building it, we still have a way to go, but I suppose that is the risk I took at the start, was my own investment of time and my own money. But I suppose I had the other business, the maps, as a backup that was constantly keeping the
wolf from the door.
Yeah, and keeping me afloat, really.
Yeah. And what kind of as you took this risk, did you have a set of financial projections that you had written down? How did you approach that?
Yeah, I did a business plan. I was waiting in an airport one day and the flight was delayed, so I sat down with the notebook and took out the calculator and started doing a rough business plan. And it made enough sense to give it a go. So I knew that I would have to hit a certain percentage of occupancy to make it worth my while. But I didn't foresee the compound growth of customers. So that was a nice surprise. But that's something that we had to grow with over the
So
the
you
last
did
few
your
years.
business plan ostensibly on what's the minimum number of people I need to get into this thing.
Yeah, it was like, if I could fill it at 30%, it would be fine. If I could fill it 50%, great. If I fill it 60%. So I knew I'd fall somewhere in that okay margin. But
And I mean, it was a brand new business to Ireland at the time. I mean, how did you tell people about it? How did the word get out to the market you were aimed at?
I suppose social media played a huge part in that. And today, no business really can operate a new business without a strong social media. But ultimately, there was this sense of community around it. That was my biggest surprise, is the community element. And that is its strongest attributes, is the people who come, they come back. And some people come every week, some people come once a month, some people come once a year, But that is the feeling that they get when they are with us, is what makes it what it is. And yeah, it's very hard to explain, hey, come out to the sauna and we'll all sit half naked in a room together and sweat with a bunch of strangers. We might
Looking
run
at
down
the Irish Sea.
Yeah, we might run down for a dip or hop into a plunge pool, and then you'll leave and you'll love it. Do you know? And to say that to someone who's never done it before, they think you're crazy. But once you do it, you get that feeling, you get to experience it, and that's what it's actually all about.
So have your early adopters effectively been your best ambassadors and your best marketeers?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, and you don't have to pay them to do that, of course, which is nice.
And everyone leaves feeling great, you know?
What was the biggest survey? So you did your financials, as you said. You did your kind of break-even financials. How quickly after starting the business did it become obvious that you were going to exceed these minimum occupancy levels? And
yeah, well, I suppose timing as well is a big factor in it, in that we were one of the first along the coast in Dublin. Anyway, we're the first in Dublin. And also it was a time where everyone was coming out of COVID anyway, so everyone was more open to trying new things, and everyone was sea swimming anyway. And while I didn't factor that into my first business plan, I could see very quickly that if we were to sustain this growth or the uniqueness, I had to keep investing back in. And it grew a lot faster than I was expecting, which is great in the sense that, of course, there's more money coming in, but it also meant I had to invest more than I was expecting. And it's one of those things. It's year 3 now, and I'm probably just coming to a stage where I'm starting to level out. But if you'd have told me 3 years ago that this is where we'd be today, I wouldn't have believed you, because it really just took off. And that is a bit of luck involved in that as well, and timing. But I've also learned so much from it.
And you said you financed it with your savings.
Yeah.
Have you got to a point now where you've had to commercialize finance in a more than that? I mean, or has the business been able to grow organically, as it were, as you get more occupancy, you get more business? I understand you started, as you said yourself, with one sauna on the back of a trailer. There's more than one now on the site, isn't there? And there are showers and plunge pools and stuff. Has that all been funded by the business itself, or have you had to put more money into it as you've gone along?
The easy answer is to say it's funded itself, but there's definitely been times where my other businesses maybe given a quick short-term loan if it's needed, and it all balances itself out. Thankfully, I wouldn't be the type of person that would feel comfortable in borrowing, because I wouldn't have a huge understanding with it. So I just stuck to what I was comfortable with, within reason, with the expansion of that business. But looking back, I can see that I might have been able to expand quicker had I borrowed.
Yeah.
But then I don't think I had the time to pursue that, considering the other stuff I'm working at. You know, so I'm very, with that business, I'm very happy to let it do its thing.
Yeah. And the business, I mean, is it quite profitable now? And assuming it is, what's the ultimate goal here? Why are you doing this, and why are you doing the other businesses? We'll talk a little bit more about in a minute.
Yeah, so ultimately, I want to step into and like that, the word you use, the entrepreneur word, and even the architect word, and where I want to go is into becoming a developer. But those 3 words aren't actually define me or where I want to go. Well, I feel I'm going to create like a new version or a new entity for what it is for a developer. So for the sake of me talking to you and everyone listening, I want to become an architect-led developer is my ultimate goal. And it's something I've always wanted to do. And it's where I've been putting in the work in architecture for years, or why I went into it in the first place. So I always saw that as the route to getting there. And I suppose the sauna was a test run in my abilities to maybe believe in myself and believe in my own ideas, and to do something that everyone else thinks is crazy, but you believe in. And like that, with the developer stuff, I want to become a sustainable design-led developer. And like that, if you say that now, everyone thinks a developer is this kind of fat cat who squeezes as much money and builds horrible houses, you know, and I understand that's it. So that's why I'm reluctant to use that word, because that's not how I see where I want to be or become, because I want to develop sustainable, low carbon emission houses that are beautiful, you know. So ultimately that is where I'm going. And while the sauna, it's a great business, it's making money, it's looking after itself. For me, it's not even about that. It was about the testing an idea and testing myself to see could I pull it off, and it's really given me the confidence now to go on.
Getting over that, what do they call it, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, you know, a lot of people out there who would probably harbour ambitions to be, I'll continue to use the word if you don't mind, be an entrepreneur, feel that maybe they're not good enough to be that. And I know you told me earlier you faced even more challenges, I suppose, in that regard than many.
Yeah.
Tell us about those if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with dyslexia in primary school, I think it was. And it's funny when I think back, like I would have spent a lot of time in the remedial class and always being told, like, maybe you might have been told you're stupid, but it's how you're made to feel in those environments. And then into secondary school, I always knew I wanted, I suppose I saw the developer as the architect when I was in school, or that was the route. So I always knew I wanted to do architecture. And then I was constantly being told, no, you're not smart enough to be an architect. You'll have to do something else. Or, you know, I was constantly being put back, and you start to believe what people tell you.
So it wasn't only the voice in your head telling you you're not good enough. It was the voices outside your head telling you you're not good enough.
And one of the big ironies about school was I used to skip school to stay at home and play on this 3D rendering software. It's called SketchUp. And everyone used to be freaking out about, like, oh, you should be doing your studying. And today, I still use that 3D software every week to like sketch up sites or ideas, and I'm not using the algebra or the French that has been forced out of my throat. But they were setbacks at the time. And then when I was in college, I kind of realized that I had ADHD as well. And when I started to understand that these weren't actual barriers, they were superpowers as such, and that's what gave me the edge on other people and how to get things done quicker, or how to focus on things, or even to take the risks that maybe a neurotypical mightn't take.
Yes.
But I can see that today, if it wasn't for my ADHD or my dyslexia, I wouldn't be as creative or as entrepreneurial, as you would like to say, as I might have been otherwise.
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, you seem to have almost a philosophical approach to development, the way you're explaining it there. But I presume you want to make money as well.
Yeah, but I don't.
You believe you can marry these two objectives of building sustainable, beautiful homes and still make a few bob.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because, like, when I came across your content in your page first, the word wealth wasn't what drew me in as such, or this idea of building wealth. And I suppose the way I see money isn't as maybe you would see money, but it is an energy, and we need money just as much as we need oxygen. And while I know that, and of course what I want to do has to be profitable for me to be able to do it, I believe that I can also do the other fulfilling things along the way, which is be a sustainable developer and make beautiful developments. Because no one's doing it at the moment. But if you look at the climate and what's going on, we're still building with concrete. We're still building 1980s houses with 2023 or 2025 A ratings, you know? And there's no creativity there. And that's what I would really like to move towards and get into. And I know I'll get there eventually, but I do have a lot to figure out. And yes, we'll have to take the finances seriously, but I do believe that I can still do all the philosophical stuff along the way, do you know?
And looking way into the future in terms of the financial objectives of all of this, I mean, what's your ultimate personal financial objective?
That's a very interesting question. I suppose, like, with my family, I spoke to this before we came on, but I've seen many businesses flourish and fail, and a lot of money made and a lot of money lost. And maybe this is just a personal thing for me, but the way I would treat money is I just like to be comfortable. And I understand that I'm taking certain risks now that I'm able to take because of my age and
circumstances.
Yeah, that I won't be able to take, but I'm aiming that by taking these risks now that the worst case scenario is they don't work out, but I'll still be comfortable enough to live. And the best case scenario is they do work out, I'll be comfortable to live, and I'll be able to develop and create these beautiful places and make beautiful things. Yeah. So I suppose from thinking that out loud there, my ultimate aim is to be able to create these beautiful designs and buildings and places and experiences, more so than the wealth or the money.
Yeah, yeah. In the terms of if I can go back to the Sea Sauna business just for a moment, and I mean, a lot of people out there will know Ireland is at all but full employment. One of the obstacles perhaps in people's minds is, where would I get the staff? Have you had to hire staff, manage staff, and how is that? How have you been able to do that? And how do you, have you been delegate? Have you had to delegate certain things? Have you had to accept that I'll hire people, they might not do as good a job as me, but I can't do everything?
Yeah, that was a huge learning curve, absolutely. And it's probably why I've kept the business so small and decided not to expand for that exact reason. And I'm lucky in that my friend works with me, and she's a manager, and also my mother now as well works at the sauna, and she's a manager as well. And then we have a few other staff that are kind of like events and part-time. But yeah, it's a real difficult part, and it's probably why early on I decided against any expansion, because more expansion just felt like more headaches. And like that, if I was going to stay in the sauna business forever and ever, I might have a different take on this. But as a business, I'm happy for it to stay lean and to leave people in charge who I know I can trust and they can run it. But I would definitely struggle if we were to franchise to another location or anything like that. And that's why I probably am staying away from that to focus more on the development stuff.
And in that regard, so the business now, the Sea Sauna business, is arguably done, in the sense of, is there any more development you're going to do with that? Or is it something now you can sit back and depend on it to produce a certain amount of profit, which, as you say, then you can depend on looking to your further need or your further desires around the sustainable development side? Is that so? You see it as a funding tool in many ways for that?
Maybe yes and no. It's probably more a safety net for me. That there's an income there for that I can fall back on if everything else fails.
Right. And
it's allowing me to take the risk to move into the other stuff, knowing that that's always there.
Yeah.
But I don't. It's funny to say, can I sit back? If you could see the list of stuff there's always needs to be done there. There's always something to do, and I'm always thinking of new ideas up there. But ultimately, I don't see it getting any bigger. I just see it getting better.
And better from the client experience,
just about user experience. We're fully off grid at the moment, so I'm trying to get electricity in. And when we get electricity, our plunge pools then can be upgraded. We can control the temperature, and then we might be able to have permanent lights as opposed to ones that are battery powered, and it will make the running easier and it'll make the experience better up there. And that's all that I'm really focused on up there at the moment, and to leave that as my safety net if everything else goes to shit, you know. And that is actually, honestly, a huge it's like relief to have that, I suppose, because I probably wouldn't be able to.
It kind of allows you to take the risks
it
you
does.
know you have to take on the sustainable development side. And is there the move on, if you wouldn't mind, to the sustainable development side for me? I mean, what do you see as the problems of the current model, if you like?
Yeah.
And is it realistic to expect that a future, more sustainable model can ultimately, as you said, I mean, we're still building houses now the way we used to in the 80s and probably in the 60s. You know, notwithstanding the big windows. I know my dad has a house built in the 70s. The windows are massive, you know, which shows you how much heat cost then. But do you see that the norm in that market in the future will be the sustainable model that you hope to be able to deliver?
You know, this is stuff I'm passionate on now, so it has to be, because there's no other option where we're headed. And in Ireland, we have a deficit of 500,000 homes at the moment.
Yes.
And our new government has been formed, and they're saying their new target is going to be 50 or 60,000 new homes a year. But that still doesn't address the deficit we have. And at the same time, we have a climate emergency. The world's getting hotter and hotter, and we're building houses with solar panels on and a bit more sustainable, but there's no real emphasis or even regulatory or legislative mechanisms that are forcing us to be sustainable. And we do have to change it. And I spent many years working, trying to convince others with my ideas or to come along with me. And I basically ran out of steam because it just felt like I was spending so much time trying to show others that we could do it another way. And ultimately, they don't want to know about it because they have a way that works. And
Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. If it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, so I see it as I want to show the way then, because it's the only way I can get to that or achieve it. And I believe that once I can pull off one version of the project like that, we can show others how it's done and make people believe in it. Because I don't know if you've ever been to Clough Jordan down in Tipperary, I think it is. It's an eco village. And you know, that's what everyone thinks when they think of an eco development. And when I go down there as an architect, I appreciate the idea and I think it's brilliant. But I can understand how people don't want to live in a kind of hippie-esque, maybe mud paths, gravel society. So the way the opportunity that I see is to merge that, kind of make sustainability sexy so that everyone wants to live there and show people that, hey, you can live in this house that is carbon neutral, built out of byproducts like timber, straw, and it's just as good as the house that the developer is building across the road out of concrete. But this one is all natural materials. Yeah. And I do believe a time will come, mightn't be in my lifetime, might be further down the line, but a time will come where we have to start using more appropriate materials to do that. And
I mean, so how are you going to prove that, Andrew? How, you said do one or something, show us. Have you got an idea now? Have you got a site in mind? Have you got is it a one-off house you're talking about, or is it 14 different houses on a site? How are you going to show us, or the market, as it were, that this is possible?
So at the moment I'm acquiring a site, hopefully, all going well, in the next few months. But even if not, there is a couple of sites I have in mind, and that will ultimately, once we have a site, that will start the ball rolling. And then from there we'll go for rezoning, and when we make those rezonings, I'll be making it with these arguments that this is what it's going to be built for, to try and give it the edge over your Glenveaghs or your Kearns as such, who are building homes, but we'll be looking to build sustainable homes. And then from that, then go for planning, get through the planning system, And the real biggest hurdle will be when we go to build it. And I don't know, because I can't tell you how many we're going to be able to build. But if I could even start with one, I'd be happy with that, because it will start the ball and the momentum behind it. And I really believe in it. As much as I believed in the sauna, I believe in this way more.
And is there, I mean, can that home be built? I mean, you know, whether we like it or not, price is a big issue in the housing market. Mm-hmm. Can that home be built the way you imagine it can be built? Can it be built and come to market at, you know, a reasonable cost relative to the same home built out of concrete?
Yeah, I believe it would be like for like. It won't be like, you won't be paying a premium for it.
Okay. And of course, that home will be far less expensive to run than the concrete home.
In fairness to the standards to today, any new home that is built is very, very economical to run. But ultimately, it's more about the building material that I'd be focused on, because all that efficiency is covered in legislation and regulations. However, the sustainability of the actual materials isn't at the moment.
Okay. Going back to, I mean, when you can I go? I'm going to go back to Sea Sauna for a minute, if I may, because there was a question I wanted to ask you that I forgot to ask you, and that was when you were sitting, you know, looking out to sea on that Christmas Eve with the hundreds of other people outdoors, and you were thinking about, well, this place could do with a sauna on the back of a trailer. How did you price it, Andrew? I mean, you're going into there was no market there. How did you set your prices? And you know, are you still setting your prices nearly? Are you kind of wondering where the glass ceiling is on price, as it were?
Yeah, well, luckily there was one other sauna in Wicklow, or two in Wicklow at the time, so I did have some market references.
Okay.
But I always had a price in mind that was affordable. And that was 3 years ago when we set that price point. And we've been able to keep it at the same price point because the business has expanded, thankfully. But at the same time, every base cost has really risen since then. And if it wasn't for the actual expansion of the business, I don't think we would have been able to maintain that price, because I have seen other smaller similar businesses having to put their prices up. But yeah, setting that price at the beginning was a whole new ball game for me. I was going in with no experience whatsoever in this market, but I was going off what feels right. And I suppose that I let that guide me, and was able then to reference off similar businesses in Ireland and also in the UK.
Okay. You mentioned earlier you've financed your entrepreneurial activity so far through your own sweat of your brow, as it were, and putting savings in. I imagine if you're going down this sustainable development route, you're not going to be able to do that necessarily with the cash you have in your own bank account. Does that mean you're going to have to go into the kind of commercial finance world? Yeah. And if it does, do you face that with a bit of trepidation, or how do you view that world?
Well, that's where I'm at the moment, and I'm trying to embrace that world and figure it out. And I'm asking a lot of different people for a lot of different advice. For my first venture into the developer realm, or the reimaginer, as I call myself, I won't be looking to risk too much of my own, I'll be maximising my own investment, if you get me, but the risk of the worst case scenario is something that I can handle if it happens. Depending on how big I want to go with it, I probably will have to look down the line, but if I'm being completely honest, I'm kind of finding my way through the dark, and that experience is something that I need to seek out, or that expertise. Yeah.
And have you tried to seek that out? And if you have, what has been your experience so far in looking?
Yeah, well, I have gone a few routes, and you're met with the usual: computer says no, bank says no. Do you tick this box? You can only get X, Y for this, or blah, blah, blah. But I have been trying to maybe be more creative with how I go about it. And I can't say too much, but what I've been doing is showing others, if they were to work with me, how I can enhance the value of something for them by them maybe selling something to me at a slightly better price. So that's how I'm doing it at the moment, because I don't need any big help for the scale I'm at. But yeah, I'm sure if it does, or when it does take off, I'll have to think more seriously about those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had a guy on last week, actually, who you might ultimately end up talking to, because he told us about the private debt market, and that he was saying that 80% of property developments, for example, in the US, are funded by private debt, whereas here in Ireland, 80% are funded by bank debt, and only 20%. And the reason being is that, as you rightly say, banks have algorithms. It's not people making lending decisions in banks; it's computer programs making lending decisions. Whereas in the private debt market, it's people making decisions. So maybe as part of something future, we can introduce you to our guest last week, and
that'd be great.
He could have a chat with you about that, because it sounds like something that would be attractive to investors, that are, and he was telling us that he's particularly interested in investments that are of some social or economic or environmental benefit. So down the line, maybe that would be a help to you. I think I've asked you all the questions I certainly had, Andrew, for you. I mean, one of the things we were talking about last week that maybe we should add to our podcast is give you an opportunity, if you have any, to ask us any questions relative to the space we're in. Have you any questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I was thinking, whenever I do come across your content, I always find it very informative and engaging for the likes of me. But I do always have a few questions, and I suppose where I'm starting out, and what I'd be asking you is, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's similar in my position who's starting out? What would be maybe 3 pieces you would say that are essential?
Well, I mean, the first one I would have advised you for, and you mentioned this off air to me as a kind of an error of timing that in your past is be a limited company. Limited companies do exactly what they say on the tin. They limit liability, and they not only limit liability, but they afford owners of those companies far greater tax efficiencies than sole traderships do. The second one I would say on finance is if you think about it, and I mentioned commercial finance there, if one bank will lend you money, every bank will lend you money. Because they use the same algorithms. So certainly shop around for finance, because, it makes simple sense, doesn't it? The less you pay for the finance, the more profit you can derive. The more profit you can derive, the more sustainable houses, in your case, you can build down the line. And then the final thing I would say is in future, never take financial advice from those paid to make other people money. Because, that's the if you've seen some, our content, predominantly my argument is the vast majority of people who call themselves financial advisors are paid to sell you stuff that's been pre-packaged, where their profit is already enshrined in the terms and conditions, where the manufacturer's profit is already enshrined in the terms and conditions. In essence, therefore, placing your profit in necessarily no better than third place. So they would be the 3 top things I would suggest to you, and to anybody else who's listening who's interested in going that route. Andrew, it only remains for me to say thank you very much for coming in today. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully, I've certainly learned something from you, and hopefully our listeners will too. And for those people, this element of our podcast is certainly aimed a lot at people who want to be entrepreneurs, but who aren't yet, and who are perhaps stuck in, high income jobs, but the high income is the thing you were prepared to give up for a period of time was that kind of luxury. And I think that's what I've certainly learned from you, is that you have to be prepared to sacrifice something. What's that old saying? 1 step backwards to take 2 steps forwards. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.